I am joined by Ariela Bitran. Ariela, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Very happy to be here.
Fun to have you. And as you can see, Ariela is the Director of Pricing Strategy at Chargebee. I think most of us in this room are familiar with Chargebee. And what we're going to talk about is all around monetization and pricing strategy. And it is no longer like an afterthought. It can be a key pillar of your go-to-market strategy. I guess my first question, why is that? Why is it more important now than ever to be having these pricing and monetization discussions?
Yeah. So for people that we've been doing pricing for a while, we're having a year. It's very exciting. There are a few factors that things we've seen traditionally that will not necessarily work anymore. First is this idea of like pricing being a second thought. It's like, oh, let's all really obsess about product. And then at some point in that scale journey, it's like, oh, we need pricing, right? It's kind of like a second thought. The second thing that we've seen sometimes happening is that it used to be okay in the SaaS space, even. It's like a very stable pricing. Companies not changing or iterating the pricing in a good 10 years. I have good examples and successful companies, by the way, the very stable pricing. And I think part of what we're seeing now is that the cost drivers in the AI space are a much more important factor. Just like the data infra cost makes you think about pricing and that overall equation much early in the journey, just to be successful. So even though growth acquisition tend to be much more important early on, and profitability is probably not what any investor is going to be asking for day one, having that vision has become a much more critical point even very early on.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for my career as an operator, it was fairly, at least it felt fairly simple. You were either,
Right.
we're on the pricier end or we're the lower end. And when we had to think about, okay, maybe we should charge for this feature, maybe we roll it in, but it wasn't overly complex. I felt like anyway, and you could test and iterate. But now we have entirely new models, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we have like outcome-based pricing, usage-based pricing, the per seat. Like, is it dying? It does feel like now, if you get this wrong, the risks are so high that it feels like if you get pricing wrong, it can actually basically kill your business for maybe the first time ever. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes and no. Good product can go a long way still, can help you really survive even one bad decision. But yes, in the sense, so what I was mentioning before is like it cannot be a second thought, right? It's something part of the strategy early on. I'll go to kind of the flip side that I've seen. I consult with a lot of our customers, early stage startups to billion in revenue companies, and when they're having these questions around pricing, what I see also is like this hyper thinking about pricing in a way that is so in depth that either creates analysis paralysis. It's like, I do not have all the variables or information I want. And in that case, what happens is that they lose momentum to make very important decisions. And something else I see is that they go very specific very early. Like a very complex per seed usage-based outcome feature model. I was like, whoa, like they really got creative there.
Yeah.
That also is a problem when we're thinking about getting pricing wrong. So start thinking about pricing, but start simple. Just like make sure you break down the process into something that it's repeatable, and start with a simple model that you can just scale and iterate and test. That would be kind of my recommendation there.
Makes sense. Yeah. As a buyer, simplicity is what we
Yeah.
want. Transparency is what we want. You kind of alluded to this, and I think we all get obsessed with this idea of product market fit. Talk about it ad nauseum. But there's this idea of pricing market fit as well.
Yes.
Obviously, they're largely intertwined. But how do you think about those two, and how do you know when you've got pricing market fit?
Right. Yeah. I will say something. I used to be, when founders would come and very early on ask me about their pricing strategy, I would be like, go back, work your product, and call me in a year. I don't say that anymore. It's like, let's talk about pricing right now. I think what we're seeing is, let's talk about a simple example like this chair over here, right? You can do the product market fit process. It's like, does it have value? Is it comfortable? Yes. Does your customers, do they want to use it? Yes, they want to use it. They even want to use it again. Like there's repeatability there. Would they use it at $500? Would they buy it? Probably the answer is no. That is what we're talking about pricing market fit, is not only whether there is value in the product, is there a price point that makes sense for your business where that value holds and the pricing and repeat buying process will still happen. So let's try to make that process as a one, and just not an, almost like it's like a product pricing market fit. That's going to make it much more successful, because that way it's not only product and the pricing, it's just like, let's iterate and test different things at the same time. So I think that it's that idea of like, is there a product that solves a problem, yes or no, in today's market? Like looking at all the competitors, looking at what's happening, that holds true, yes, and at a pricing that actually can sustain and scale my business in a profitable way. So that's where like the process can happen. Rather than waiting 2-3 years to test your first pricing model, you can start early on to see if the value holds at a price.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And I'm going to go a little off plan on this one. I'm going to
Okay.
put you on
Yeah.
the spot. But I think there's this fear, and I'm sure you've seen it. If I'm on a per seat model
Yeah.
and I want to make a switch, there's this fear of like cannibalization. How can you de-risk that as a business?
Yeah. The process of changing pricing models. So pricing model is the end tail of that pricing process that we're thinking about. Okay. So it's using the pricing model is not choosing the right pricing model is really not the key piece of it. It's really around understanding some other factors that I'm going to get in a second. But once you have your value metric, let's say, and you really understand which part of your product adds value and can be measurable to your customers, testing new pricing models, it's okay. And it's how you do it, how you treat your current customers, whether you grandfather them or give them the options, whether you can do some sort of A/B testing. That is not such a risky strategy. Like, you do need to have the systems in place to be able to iterate, measure, have the data. That's not simple, but assuming that the right systems are in place, testing new pricing models when all the other variables are already built is just like the end tail. And that's how you de-risk it. It's like you still understand the value, you still understand the market. You just go and do some sort of A/B testing or on a different pricing model, always respecting your current customers would be.
And do you recommend doing that just a subsection of customers, or just take a small cohort, maybe overly communicate to other customers?
So first, new pricing model, I would recommend it to test it potentially with prospects. Whether it's a B2B, and you just will enable one or two salespeople to go and offer that pricing model, or you have more a PLG approach where you can do A/B testing on your website. Those are low risk approach. Now with your current customers, there are a few different options. Sometimes you can give them the option to switch. You can cap the pricing in a way that it will make them never pay more than something related to the current model. So they can stay on the traditional pricing, but they're comfortable that they're not overpaying. It's around transparency, almost over communicating with your early customers, early adopters. So you want to make sure you're remaining like valuable for them as well.
For sure. Yeah. That transparency, now that we're so hyper connected in all these like
Yeah.
professional communities and events like this, like
Yeah.
the amount of times even in our, GTM Fund Slack channel that people are comparing pricing.
Yep.
They'll be going through, a sales cycle, and they'll just ask everyone, hey, what are you paying for X? What's your seat
Yes.
price? And So that transparency is key. All right, let's move on to the different styles of pricing and kind of the pros and cons of each, how founders should be thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then, when, in your opinion, does it make sense to favor one over
Yeah,
the other?
absolutely. So going through the journey, I will say that doing the exercise of value, market, and cost is what it's going to lend you the right pricing model. And where even like potentially making a mistake in your pricing model is not going to make or break your business. So assuming we did the exercise, right? So we understand the value, we understand our competitors really well. We understand our costs, are able to measure how this correlates. It's like the more value a customer have, how our cost drivers correlated to that value. That's an important exercise. And you come up with your value metric, and then you start thinking about your pricing model. So it's almost like the end of the process. So we're going to start with subscription. And I'm sure, I don't think you ask about subscription-based pricing. I'm sure a lot of here probably have some sort of subscription. It's very traditional. It's has certain advantages. I will say that either if you're very early on, just come up with a subscription pricing. It's a good idea. Or if you almost own a category, if you're Microsoft or someone that really can just set up a subscription based pricing, it's simple. And simple has an advantage, especially early on.
And we're talking about like a flat monthly
Yeah,
or annual.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's usually how it will look like.
Yeah.
It has risks. Some of the risks is that correlation to value. It's really not there. Also to your cost drivers. Some customers might be much more costly than others, and it's hard to correlate that to your subscription pricing. As long as you're aware of those risks and potentially looked into iterating soon after, it's a good way to start. And I've seen that successfully as like a launch pricing for many startups in the AI space. Yeah, so that's subscription. I think the next one is seat based, which is we think about it as like it's dead with AI, right?
Mhm.
Keep hearing this.
Is it dead? Are we calling that right now?
No. Okay. So I think in the long run, probably. What I will say though is that if an AI technology today is augmenting the capability of an end user, seat-based pricing makes sense.
Mm.
So like if there's still a sales team there, but you're giving them a tool to make their sales cycle more efficient, it's still software to user, then a per seat-based pricing, again, at least to start, makes a lot of sense. That end user might move to fully AI agents one day, and then that pricing obviously is not going to be relevant. But like if your users are not there yet, don't try to and I'm going to say something I'm going to regret it, but don't try to innovate so much.
Right.
You can differentiate yourself given pricing, but you don't have to. So if you're already differentiating yourself somewhere in the product, maybe going with the pricing that it's well established in a category is not a bad idea, including seat based, as long as you're really understanding what's happening at the end consumer level. And when they start changing, moving away from whichever users were buying your product, you need to move with them. You need to change with them. So it's not that.
Would you recommend, if you decide that the seat-based model is the right one for you, and you kind of allude to the fact that it's probably going away though in a few
Yep.
years,
Yep.
how can you almost like create an escape route for yourself so it's easier to adopt one of these other ones in the future?
Yeah. So I think keeping the value metric really clear, how that evolves, is what it's going to allow you to reinvent the pricing model. And that's why I mean that foundation around value, market, and cost drivers. That's a constant process. Whether you have a static pricing shown on your website for your end consumer, might look like, oh, these people have just one pricing model. What's happening on the back end is that you're always relearning what's the value, who is my ICP, how are they using it, what's happening in the market, what are my like competitors. We've seen barriers of entry going down significantly. So obviously that is a risk in keeping that eye in the market very constantly. Same with the cost drivers, really understanding how that correlates to the value. If you're doing that constantly, I think that changing you'll have leading indicators to say, hey, look, the usage of this is going down. The value is not so, oh, so maybe we should start testing. And then you just run an A/B test. No one knows about it. You're just showing a different price to 50 customers in Germany, and then seeing how that ends. So that's the process. I think that as long as it's constant, you're going to be safe.
Awesome.
Yeah. So usage based, I think that at least we've seen a lot of hybrid, but components of usage is a very, very popular. Um, it used to be the value-based pricing per excellence, right? I'm paying for what I use. Customers love that. I'm not paying more or less. It is actually really good. I've seen it go wrong, and I want to just give a few examples when this pricing can go wrong. I think it's important. Um, Chargebee has a usage component, right? It's a value metric that the customer really doesn't get to choose. It's like how much revenue you process through our platform. You're not like, should I process the next dollar? There's no one doing that. I've some other solutions, you do have a user being like, I'm about to move away from the $29 all in. Do I want to go that extra usage? And there's always almost like a decision where there's that marginal benefit to the cost, marginal benefit. That's where I think usage can be frictional. So just want to bring awareness. It is a good pricing model. Think about how it lands in the customer head. I think it's just an important thing.
You're almost like hamstringing the ability to achieve the outcome that you're trying for them to.
Right. So maybe that same case, make a $50 all in. You're going to be better off. They're going to be paying more. They're not going to be questioning whether they should spend that next dollar. So there are ways to measure kind of the effect of your pricing in the decision making. You see, like I run, we have a customer that does translation. So I was running their data. They use Chargebee for usage, to understand their usage data. And I was looking like these curves, how like usage and like start like really plateauing. And I started running what are those points. And it's like, oh, here's when the usage start kicking at a higher rate. I was like, guys, your pricing is broken. Like you're literally hindering your customer from using more the platform. So there are ways that really work for us, like revenue. No one is choosing whether they're gonna sell to the next customer. They're always happy. But then for some customers, it's just something that they should be careful about.
Yeah. You saw in the data that every time they're about to reach like
Yeah.
a new threshold, they were plateauing, which is
Yeah.
like the opposite of what you want.
It's exactly.
And so what is your suggestion then to stop that? Is it just
Change your pricing model.
change the price? Okay.
Go change your pricing model. Yeah, your value metric may be the same, like how many words you're translating or whatever usage of the component may be the same, but rethink the way you're doing pricing, rethink some good, better, best tiers that could allow them to more freely use your platform. So there are ways to rethink the pricing model without necessarily breaking the value cost market assumptions that you have.
And in that example, how can the pricing team partner with the CS team to also kind of get rid of some of the risk there? Because I imagine in that example, like if 3 months before I'm about to hit my next tier, my CSM reaches out to me and kind of coaches me on the value of the next tier, like that,
Right.
that can kind of help. How have you partnered with kind of your post sales function to
Yeah.
mitigate some of that risk?
That's a really good question. I'll say that many of these models and customers are mostly PLG, so that factor doesn't necessarily play there. Moving from, let's say, subscription to usage, that management of internal teams tend to be one of the biggest risks. Sales compensations or upselling. So when you're more in the B2B SaaS space, I will say that you need to have different ways for a customer to be upsold. Like it cannot only be, oh, you're reaching a limit here. It needs to be more rich than that. It's about features. It's about how else can we add them value rather than make it only a pricing move. I see that a lot. It's like, can you price this in a way that eventually they're gonna need to move to the next tier. And I'm like, what else are we going to offer them? It can not only be pricing.
Yeah.
So that's my recommendation there.
That makes sense. And the last one, outcome-based.
Yeah. So outcome-based. I think that has kind of become the idea of value-based pricing per excellence. Like, what better than just paying for when I'm happy with the tool, right? I'm surprised not many people are actually using it, and I can understand why. I've seen it usually wrong a few times. First of all, is the confusion between usage and outcome, right? Like, if I'm a founder, I created this technology. I get the feeling that for you to use my solution, you're getting a positive outcome, but that's not necessarily the case. So it needs to be really outcome-based. Is one or solve problems. Obviously, the willingness to pay for that solution is much higher, but it does get sometimes frictional into like, maybe I could have gone to that same result without your solution. And can I fully attribute it to you, or are the other 5 different factors playing into it? So there's definitely some good examples of outcome-based pricing in the AI space, but it does not come without risk. I would say my recommendation is probably not start with outcome-based, but test with a little element of your solution. Start testing it out. Yeah, it's obviously exciting, and it sounds like that shiny new pricing model.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I feel like in theory, it's what we all want and hopefully what we're moving towards. But,
Right.
My least favorite thing as an operator running sales teams, marketing was attribution. I hated that. You spend so much time, like 30% of your time in, executive meetings, attributing who drove what outcome. And now we can have
And
it
that
today
can
for
happen with
all of us.
the pricing,
Yeah.
right?
Very cool. Well, Ariela, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will open it up for some questions.
Yeah.
I know this is a hot topic, so anyone who has specific questions around monetization or pricing would love to help answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you in a position to share any outcome-based examples, outcome-based pricing?
Yeah. I went through a few of my favorite examples and actually took some notes. So Sierra.ai is a good outcome-based example. They have a website where they explain you what is a positive outcome. That type of tools, I think, successfully can price based on outcome. It's very clear that you can attribute it to them because they owned end-to-end that relationship and the resolution is based on the customer feedback. So if I care about my customers' satisfaction, them saying yes, successfully closed, I'm good. I don't need anything else. So that's a good example that I've seen well utilized. I have some that not that well, but yeah, that's yeah, absolutely.
And then just another kind of example that I've seen quite a bit is kind of in the SDR Copilot, space. And that one's fairly simple of everyone, they want to use your sequence builder and all this stuff, but all they really care about is getting a meeting. And so the outcome is always a meeting based. Yeah. Doug, do you have a
I was
question?
going to ask, how do you think about, do you see the pushback between, CFOs wanting predictability versus, which is the seat-based model, versus this kind of, hey, I don't know what my bill's going to be next month?
Yeah. So quite interestingly, I've seen that push both internally, like Chargebee, and also our customers. There's a level of scale where customers want predictability. So as much as having a very much usage outcome-based price early on, once the value of your product is well established, having an option of an enterprise type agreement, if you're dealing in the B2B space, seems to be more attractive than keeping that usage-based model forever. So I would recommend, especially companies going up market, if they're fully usage-based, to start thinking a little bit more about how those larger enterprise want to be able to predict as well. It's not only you as a founders that you want to know how much revenue is going to come from the next user. They also want to know how much you're going to spend in your solution, especially when the value is being already well established.
I would second that. I find there's a direct correlation between people who love usage-based model and people who've never had these, never.
You're so
said
Yeah.
that assist-based models are a pain in the,
Yeah.
right? They're sometimes the only model, but they're really hard.
So it goes back to, it sounds good in theory, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So it can be a good like way to get started and get your product out there. Then have a backup. Like don't try to go to a large enterprise with a pure usage. I don't think it's gonna.
Yeah, it feels like it's really good for like initial disruption.
Yeah.
If you can go and because it sounds so good in theory, you can probably go gain quite a bit of market share, but have, alternate plans as well. Any other questions? Perfect. Awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.